All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah, great to be back.
Today, we're taking on a thinker who, uh,
A big one.
yeah, kind of a giant in the world of political philosophy and history,
Yeah,
right?
definitely a giant.
G.W.F. Hegel.
Hegel, yep.
Now, I know some of you might be thinking, Hegel. Ugh, isn't that like super dense and difficult?
It can be.
Yeah, but trust us on this one. Hegel's ideas are incredibly relevant, especially if you're prepping for the UPSC, and specifically if you're focusing on international relations.
That's right.
Because he gives us a framework for understanding like the big picture of how societies and states evolve, the dynamics of power, the whole struggle for freedom that drives so much of history.
And conflict.
Yeah, conflict too. All those things that are the heart of international relations.
Exactly.
So we're going to break down some of Hegel's key ideas in a way that's hopefully a little more digestible than, trying to wade through his original texts.
I'll try to make it clear. Yeah.
Right, because we know you've got exams to study for. You don't have time to get lost in the Hegelian labyrinth.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean we're going to oversimplify things. We're going to go deep,
yeah.
but we're going to do it in a way that's engaging, hopefully even a little bit fun.
A little fun with Hegel. Why not?
So let's jump right in. One of the most important things to understand about Hegel is his philosophy of history.
Yeah, this is crucial.
He didn't see history as just a random series of events, right?
No, not at all.
He believed there was a pattern, a progression, almost like an unfolding story.
A story with a direction.
Exactly. And that direction, for Hegel, was towards the realization of freedom.
The evolution of freedom's consciousness, as he put it.
Wow. Freedom's consciousness. That's pretty profound.
It is, and it's a key concept for understanding Hegel's whole system.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this a bit. How did Hegel see this progression of freedom playing out in history? Like, did he see it as a smooth upward trajectory?
Well, not exactly. Hegel believed that history moved forward through a process of conflict and resolution.
Ah, so it's not always a straight line.
More like a sort of spiral.
Okay, it's a spiral. I like that image.
So he looked at different civilizations throughout history and saw how they contributed to this unfolding of freedom. He starts with, ancient China and India.
Okay, so right away,
Well,
we're going way back.
yeah, all the way back.
And he saw these Eastern civilizations as kind of static, right?
Yeah, he argued that they existed outside of the main flow of historical development.
Which, right off the bat, we see this Eurocentric perspective.
Definitely.
Which is something, for those of you prepping for the UPSC, you want to keep in mind and analyze critically.
Very important.
But, I mean, putting that aside for a moment, why did he see these Eastern civilizations as static? What was it about their systems that he thought was holding them back?
Well, Hegel believed that true historical progress required a certain kind of dynamism, a clash of ideas, a dialectical struggle.
Okay, hold on. The dialectic, we're going to get to that later. Right?
We will, but for now, just think of it as a process of tension and resolution that drives things forward.
Okay, got it.
So for Hegel, he saw this clash of ideas beginning with Persia.
Persia, interesting.
Yeah, he saw Persia as a turning point because that's where the concept of universal rule emerged.
Universal rule.
Yeah, the idea that one empire, one set of laws, could govern a vast and diverse territory.
Ah, so a step towards, like, a more globalized worldview.
You could see it that way.
Interesting.
And this concept of universal rule clashed with the Greeks, who were all about individual freedom and self-governance.
The Greeks, of course, famous for their democracy.
Exactly.
And that clash, it wasn't just theoretical.
No, it played out in very real ways.
Like in the Battle of Salamis, for example.
Precisely. Hegel saw Salamis as a pivotal moment, not just a military victory, but an ideological one.
So it's not just about who wins the battle, it's about the ideas that are at stake.
Exactly. It marked the triumph of Greek ideals over what he saw as Persian despotism.
So does that mean Hegel thought ancient Greece was the perfect model of freedom?
Well, not quite. He admired the Greeks, but he also recognized the limitations of their system. For example, he pointed out the prevalence of slavery in ancient Greece.
Right, a pretty big contradiction if you're talking about freedom for all.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even societies that value freedom can have blind spots and deep contradictions.
And that's a lesson that's still relevant today, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We often talk about the spread of democracy and human rights, but even in the most advanced democracies, we see inequalities and injustices.
It's a reminder that the struggle for freedom is ongoing.
Always evolving, always complex.
So we've gone from the East to Persia and Greece. Where does Hegel take us next in his historical tour?
He moves on to Rome.
Rome, the
Yeah, the
empire.
empire, yes.
And what did he see in Rome that was relevant to this unfolding of freedom?
Well, he saw Rome as a pivotal moment in the development of, what he called freedom's consciousness.
Okay.
He saw Rome as this transition from the kind of smaller scale world of the Greek city-states to a vast, sprawling empire.
And how did that shift in scale, that change in like the political landscape, how did that impact the Roman experience of freedom?
That's where it gets fascinating. Hegel argued that the vastness and complexity of the Roman Empire actually led to a sense of alienation, a feeling of disconnect from the political system.
So bigger isn't always better when it comes to freedom.
Well, that's a complex question, but in this case, Hegel seemed to think that the expansion of the Roman Empire created new challenges and tensions.
Interesting.
He pointed out that philosophies like Stoicism and Epicureanism emerged during the Roman period, and he saw those as a kind of response to this sense of alienation.
Ah, so these philosophies of like inner peace and detachment from the world, Hegel saw them as coping mechanisms?
Exactly. It was almost like a retreat inwards, a withdrawal from a system that felt too big, too impersonal.
It's interesting that you mentioned that sense of withdrawal because, we see something similar happening today
Oh, absolutely.
in our globalized world with its complex systems and, this constant flow of information. A lot of people feel disconnected, overwhelmed.
It's like that sense of alienation that Hegel was talking about, but on a global scale.
Right. And it's fueling, things like populism, this desire for simpler, more local forms of community.
Hegel gives us a framework for understanding these trends, these longings for a different way of being in the world.
So we've got this sense of disillusionment in Rome. What's the next chapter in Hegel's story of freedom?
Well, that's where Christianity comes in.
Christianity.
Yeah, Hegel saw Christianity as a response to the limitations of the Roman world.
In what way?
Well, he argued that Christianity shifted the focus from the external material world to the inner spiritual realm.
So it's like a turning inward. But
Mhm.
this time it's not about withdrawal or resignation. It's about something else.
Exactly. For Hegel, Christianity, even though it emphasizes faith and submission to God, it actually planted the seeds for a new understanding of individual freedom.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow that.
Yeah.
How does submitting to God lead to a greater sense of individual freedom?
Well, think about it this way. Christianity emphasizes the inherent dignity and worth of each person created in God's image.
Right.
That idea that each individual has a kind of intrinsic value, it lays the groundwork for later ideas about human rights and individual autonomy.
I see. So even though Christianity might seem on the surface to be about obedience and authority, Hegel saw something deeper there, something that could potentially liberate the individual.
Precisely. And it's hard to overstate how Christianity as a global religion continues to shape international affairs even today.
Right. It's a major force, both politically and culturally.
Absolutely.
So from the inner world of Christianity, where does Hegel take us next?
He brings us to the Germanic world,
Okay.
the era of the Reformation and the Enlightenment.
Ah, the Enlightenment. Reason, science, individual rights, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And for Hegel, this was a pivotal moment
Why is that?
because he saw this era as a kind of rebirth of the spirit of freedom, combined with the new emphasis on reason and rationality.
So it's like all those threads from earlier periods, those ideas about individual worth, the importance of reason, they all come together in the Enlightenment.
Precisely. And for Hegel, this was a crucial step in the development of the modern world because this is where the modern nation-state emerges.
The nation state, the building block of the international system.
Exactly. And this concept, this idea of a nation state with its claims to sovereignty, its borders, its relationship with other nation states, it's at the very heart of international relations.
And it all goes back to, according to Hegel, this period of intellectual and political upheaval, this era of the Reformation and the Enlightenment.
He saw it as a turning point.
So we've got the nation state. What else is happening in this era that's shaping the modern world?
Well, we can't talk about Hegel and the modern world without mentioning the French Revolution.
Ah, yes. The French Revolution. Liberty, equality, fraternity.
A pivotal moment in history, no doubt.
It shook things up, challenged the old order, and its ideas are still debated and discussed today.
Absolutely.
I'm guessing Hegel had some thoughts on this.
Oh, you bet he did. Hegel was deeply engaged with the French Revolution.
How so?
He saw it as, on the one hand, this powerful expression of the human desire for freedom, this striving for a more just and equitable society.
Okay.
But it was also very aware of the revolution's excesses, the violence, the chaos.
The Reign of Terror.
Exactly.
So it was like a mixed bag for him. He was both inspired and horrified by what he saw.
That's a great way to put it. He saw the immense potential of the revolution to transform society, but he also recognized the dangers of unchecked revolutionary fervor.
It's like he's warning us, right?
Yeah.
That even the most well-intentioned efforts to reshape the world can have unintended consequences.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that's still incredibly relevant today, especially in the realm of international relations.
Because when you're dealing with different nations, different cultures, different ideologies, the stakes are so high.
Absolutely.
So understanding history, not just as a collection of facts and figures, but as this complex interplay of ideas and forces, that's crucial for anyone working in international relations.
It's about understanding the patterns, the tensions, the potential for both progress and disaster.
And Hegel gives us a framework for doing that.
He does.
He helps us see the big picture, the connections, the underlying currents that shape world events.
And for UPSC aspirants, that kind of deep understanding is essential. It allows you to analyze current events with greater nuance, to make connections that others might miss, to formulate arguments that are both insightful and persuasive.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from ancient civilizations to the birth of the modern nation-state and the tumultuous events of the French Revolution. It feels like Hegel's journey through history has brought us right up to the doorstep of our modern world. But there's more to come. Hegel believed that history was progressing towards an endpoint.
An endpoint he called the end of history.
Right, the end of history. Now, what did he mean by that? Does he literally think time would stop? That there would be no more events? Well, to find out, you'll have to join us for the next part of our Hegelian deep dive.
That's right. We'll be back to explore this fascinating and often misunderstood concept, and we'll unpack what it means for understanding international relations today. Stay tuned.
See you next time. All right, welcome back, everyone, to our deep dive into the world of Hegel.
Back into the Hegelian labyrinth.
That's right, we're picking up where we left off with this intriguing and, let's be honest, kind of controversial idea of the end of history.
Yeah, it's a concept that gets thrown around a lot, often misunderstood.
So let's set the record straight. Last time we talked about Hegel's view of history as this grand narrative, this progression of freedom's consciousness.
Right, unfolding through this dialectical process of conflict and resolution.
And he believed this process was heading towards a culmination point, an end point.
Which he called the end of history.
But, and here's the big question, did he literally think time would stop? That there would be no more events, no more changes?
Well, not exactly. It's not about a specific date or a sudden halt.
Okay, so what did he mean then?
For Hegel, the end of history was more about the realization of a certain form of social and political order.
A form of order that he believed represented the highest stage of human development.
Precisely. He saw it as the culmination of this long historical process, the point where freedom's consciousness had fully realized itself.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but I need specifics. What did this ideal social and political order actually look like for Hegel?
Well, he believed that his contemporary Prussia, with its constitutional monarchy and emphasis on individual rights within a strong state framework, was pretty darn close.
Wait, hold on a second. He thought a 19th century German state was the pinnacle of human progress. That seems a bit, well, limited, doesn't it?
Well, that's where the critical analysis comes in.
Right.
And where you, as a UPSC aspirant, can really flex those analytical muscles.
Okay, so how do we critique this end of history idea?
Well, for starters, was Hegel being a bit too Eurocentric? Did he maybe overlook the potential for future conflicts, new ideologies that might challenge his neat and tidy endpoint?
Yeah, history didn't exactly end with 19th century Prussia, did it?
Not quite, but even if we disagree with his specific conclusions, the questions he raises are still incredibly relevant.
Like what?
Like, what is the nature of progress? Can we ever achieve a truly just and stable world order? What is the role of the state in all of this? These are questions that are at the heart of international relations today.
So Hegel, even if he was wrong about the specifics, he was asking the right questions.
He was. He was grappling with these fundamental issues that continue to shape our world. And that's why engaging with him, even if it's to disagree with him, is so valuable.
It forces us to think deeply about these big picture questions.
Exactly. And for those of you studying for the UPSC, that kind of deep thinking is essential.
Okay, so we've got this overarching idea of history progressing towards an endpoint. But how does that connect to Hegel's more practical philosophy?
His ideas about how societies actually function.
Exactly.
Well, that's where his work, The Philosophy of Right, comes in.
Okay, The Philosophy of Right, another one of those dense Hegelian texts.
It can be, but it's worth diving into.
So what's it about? Give us the Spark Notes version.
Well, it's about how individuals and the state should relate to each other, how institutions should be structured. Basically, a blueprint for a well-functioning society based on his understanding of history and the development of freedom.
Okay, so it's like his attempt to translate his big picture view of history into a practical guide for how to live and govern.
Exactly.
And one of the key concepts in the philosophy of right is his idea of civil society.
Yeah, civil society is crucial for Hegel.
Now, we hear that term all the time, but I'm guessing he had something specific in mind.
He did. He wasn't just talking about any random group of people hanging out. For Hegel, civil society was this very particular sphere of human interaction
Existing where?
between the family and the state.
Okay, so it's like this middle ground.
Exactly. It's the realm of individual needs and desires, economic activity, the pursuit of self-interest, all those things that happen outside the family, but before you get to the level of the state.
So it's where people go out into the world, try to make a living, interact with each other,
Mm-hmm.
basically just do their thing.
Exactly. And Hegel saw this as a vital part of human development.
How so?
He believed that it's within civil society that individuals learn to negotiate their interests with others, develop a sense of independence, become part of a larger social fabric.
But didn't he also say that civil society, left unchecked, could lead to chaos and fragmentation?
You're catching on. He did recognize that the pursuit of individual self-interest could have a downside.
Right. Too much individualism, not enough focus on the common good.
Exactly. He saw the potential for civil society to become atomized, with individuals pursuing their own narrow goals without regard for the whole.
So that's where the state comes in, to provide order and stability, to rein in those self-serving impulses.
That's part of it. But here's where it gets interesting. Hegel didn't see the state as simply a force for repression.
Okay, so he wasn't advocating for some kind of authoritarian state.
Not at all. For Hegel, the state was more like a rational framework, a set of institutions and laws designed to ensure that individual freedom could flourish without descending into chaos.
So it's like he's saying that true freedom can only exist within a structure, a system of rules and regulations that prevent things from spiraling out of control.
That's a great way to put it. And this idea has huge implications for international relations.
How so?
Well, if you think about the global system with all its different actors and competing interests, the question of how to balance individual freedom with the need for order and stability is paramount.
It's a constant tension?
It is. And Hegel's ideas about the state and civil society provide a framework for thinking about these complex issues.
So we've got the family, civil society, the state all interacting in this delicate dance.
A dance choreographed by the dialectic, you might say.
Right, the dialectic. We're going to get to that soon. But before we do, there's one more piece of the Hegelian puzzle I want to touch on.
Okay.
Hegel also talked about something called corporations.
Ah, yes, the corporations. This is one of those areas where Hegel's language can be a bit confusing.
Because when we hear corporations today, we think of, giant multinational companies.
Right, but that's not what Hegel had in mind.
So what were these Hegelian corporations?
He envisioned them as a kind of intermediary between individuals and the state.
Okay, so not businesses in the modern sense.
Not quite. They were more like guilds or professional associations representing different sectors of civil society.
So like organized groups of people working together within their particular field.
Exactly. Think of them as modern-day professional organizations, labor unions, things like that.
Interesting.
Hegel believed that these corporations were essential for a healthy society
Why is that?
because he saw them as a way for individuals to participate in public life, to pursue their interests within a framework of ethical principles and social responsibility.
So it's not just about individual self-interest, but about contributing to the well-being of the larger community.
Precisely. And this idea has some interesting parallels with contemporary debates about the role of civil society organizations in global governance.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about NGOs, advocacy groups, all these non-state actors that are playing an increasingly important role in international affairs.
They're shaping norms, influencing policy, holding states accountable.
Exactly. And it's almost like Hegel anticipated the emergence of these actors and their growing influence on the global stage.
Fascinating. So understanding Hegel's concept of corporations can actually help us make sense of the complex relationship between states and non-state actors in today's world.
It gives us a historical and philosophical framework for thinking about these issues.
This is all incredibly relevant for the UPSC exam, folks. It's not just about memorizing facts and figures, but about developing a deep understanding of the philosophical and historical forces that shape international relations.
It's about seeing the connections, understanding the patterns, and applying that knowledge to make sense of the world around us.
And that's what Hegel helps us do.
He does. He challenges us to think critically, to see beyond the headlines, to grasp the underlying dynamics that drive global events.
And for those of you aspiring to a career in international relations, whether it's through the UPSC or other avenues, that kind of intellectual depth is invaluable.
Absolutely. It's what sets you apart, allows you to see things that others might miss.
So we've explored Hegel's ideas about the end of history, the role of civil society, the state, and these fascinating corporations. But there's one more big piece of the Hegelian puzzle we need to address.
The dialectic.
The dialectic. This is considered one of his most important contributions to philosophy, and it's incredibly relevant for understanding how change happens, both in history and in the world around us.
It's a powerful tool for analysis.
So stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to unpack the Hegelian dialectic and explore how it can help you make sense of complex international issues. Don't miss it. Welcome back, deep divers. We're in the final stretch of our Hegelian odyssey, and we've saved the most brain-bending concept for last, the dialectic.
Yeah, it can seem intimidating.
Right, like, is this going to be on the exam or what? But trust me, folks, once you grasp this, it's like having a cheat code for understanding how the world works. Super helpful, especially for you UPSC folks.
Absolutely. The dialectic, at its core, is about how things change.
Okay, so not just some abstract philosophy thing.
Not at all. It's a tool, a way to analyze ideas, history, really any process of development. You see, Hegel didn't think ideas just existed in isolation.
Right, they bump into each other, right?
Exactly. They clash, they combine, they transform.
Yeah.
And that's the dialectic in action.
Okay, give us the Hegelian dialectic for dummies explanation.
All right, imagine you have an idea. Call it the thesis.
Okay, thesis, got it.
But inevitably, something challenges that thesis. An opposing view, a contradiction, that's the antithesis.
So thesis, antithesis, classic conflict, right?
Right. But here's the twist. It's not about one side winning and crushing the other. The struggle between them, the tension, that's where the magic happens.
Magic.
Well, I mean, that's where a new understanding emerges, a synthesis that incorporates elements of both but goes beyond their limitations.
So it's like a level up. Like thesis and antithesis had a baby, and it's the synthesis.
Well, yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah.
But how does this thesis, antithesis, synthesis thing, how does it actually play out in the real world? Like in international relations, for example?
Let's take the concept of national sovereignty, a big one in IR, right?
Huge. Every country wants to be in charge of its own destiny, its own territory.
Right. So you've got that strong idea of absolute state sovereignty. That's your thesis. But in a globalized world, that sovereignty is constantly bumping up against other forces.
Like what?
International organizations, global trade agreements, even things like transnational social movements, they all chip away at the absolute power of states.
Yeah, it's like the world's getting smaller, so everyone's bumping elbows a bit more.
Exactly. So you have this tension between the thesis of absolute state sovereignty and the antithesis of global interconnectedness.
Okay, conflict. What's the synthesis?
What we're seeing emerge now is a new understanding of sovereignty, one that recognizes limits, the need for cooperation, the reality that states can't just act like islands anymore.
Ah, so it's not that sovereignty is gone, it's just evolving.
Exactly. And the dialectic helps us make sense of that evolution. It shows how seemingly contradictory forces can actually drive progress, lead to new forms of political order.
Okay, I'm liking this dialectic thing more and more. It's like a way to see how change happens without freaking out about it.
Right. It's about understanding the process, the back and forth, the tensions that ultimately lead to something new.
So for those UPSC preppers out there, how can they use this dialectical thinking in their studies?
It's about thinking critically, seeing beyond simple either arguments, recognizing that in international relations especially, there are always multiple forces at play, constantly interacting.
So like if we're looking at the rise of China, we wouldn't just see it as a threat, but also as part of a larger historical process, maybe leading to some new balance of power.
Perfect example. The dialectic helps you avoid those knee-jerk reactions, those simplistic explanations. It encourages you to look deeper, to see the complexities, and maybe even anticipate where those tensions might lead.
Hegel also applied this dialectic to his whole philosophy of history,
I
right?
did. He believed that history itself unfolds through this process of thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
So, like, major historical events, they're not just random, they're part of a larger pattern.
Exactly. And for Hegel, that pattern, that ultimate goal, was the realization of freedom.
So all those revolutions, wars, even periods of peace and progress, they were all steps in this grand dance towards greater freedom.
That's how he saw it. And even though history hasn't always followed his exact predictions, his framework is still incredibly useful. It helps us make sense of those big, sweeping historical narratives.
It's like a way to zoom out and see the forest, not just the individual trees.
Exactly. And that's the power of Hegel. He challenges us to think big, to see connections, to understand the historical forces that shape our world.
Well, folks, there you have it. The Hegelian dialectic in a nutshell. I hope you're not too brain fried.
A little mental workout never hurt anyone.
Right. Especially if you're aiming for the UPSC. But seriously, we've covered a lot in this deep dive, from Hegel's view of history to his ideas about the state, civil society, corporations, and now the dialectic. It's a lot to process, but it's worth the effort.
It is. Hegel might seem daunting at first, but once you get him, it's like you've unlocked a whole new level of understanding.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here on the deep dive, helping you go beyond the surface to really engage with the ideas that shape our world. So if you enjoyed this journey into the mind of Hegel, hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, especially those UPSC warriors out there.
And don't forget to give us a like.
We appreciate your support. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.